Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
I'm Ryan Cooper. So today it's just the two of us once again. Two just guys being dudes. We'll talk about it in a minute, but we're just coming down from the high here in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania of a Donald Trump rally, which I did not even realize was happening until we were driving to Target. And
that wasn't your personal invitation? You didn't say, hey, Donald, come hang out in my hometown?
No, and I didn't get an invitation from the campaign either, the bastards.
Rude.
Yeah, we didn't know until there were cops everywhere and traffic was real bad. But yeah, before we get to that, I guess we should mention, as usual, that this podcast is sponsored by the American Prospect Magazine. If you head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/leftanchor and sign up at $10 a month, you can get a free digital subscription to the magazine, plus our bonus episodes, which is typically every other one. $5 a month will just get you the bonus and our undying gratitude. And otherwise, you can rate, review, or send to your friends. And we're your social media network of choice. I don't recommend Twitter. Elon throttles link posts that have any outgoing link. But, Threads, Blue Sky, put carrier pigeons, all good.
Any means of communication you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
Invisible ink letters.
Yeah, that's right. Smoke signals, Morse code, a couple of Dixie cups with string, sent to the neighbor kids. But anyway, yeah. I guess we can get to it.
So Trump, he's still campaigning, apparently. It took him the allure of Wilkes-Barre to go on the trail again. Because he had been basically doing hardly anything, letting J.D. Vance go on the trail in his stead, right?
Yeah, he was doing one event a week, which is not very many for a presidential campaign. I mean, typically, I think you're talking at least 3, sometimes more. It's funny. I saw the ad for the email announcement that we're going to Enchanting Wilkes-Barre. And by the way, I just want to clarify, this is not in Wilkes-Barre proper. This is in Wilkes-Barre Township, which I'm not sure exactly what that, why that is a separate city. I'm sure there's some stupid history there, but that's where all the businesses are at. And they have an arena there. Yeah. You go to Home Depot, Lowe's, Target. And I spent a lot of time in that place, which sucks because it's very strody, lots of traffic. Yet, that's, if you want to go to Best Buy or Lowe's, that's where you got to go.
And besides the fact that it's in Pennsylvania, what's the demographic and population over there like? Why do you think he chose that spot?
Yeah, I think, this would be my first comment, which is that it is crazy that any presidential campaign would have events in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I mean, I guess NEPA is sort of a decent sized population center, the Northeast Pennsylvania, that is NEPA. That's the Scranton, Wilkes-Barre metropolitan area. It's got about 500,000 people in it. So not nobody, but it's not Pittsburgh. It's not Philadelphia by a mile. And yet this is not I think Trump at least has had 2, probably more than that, rallies since this campaign started. And in 2020, there are several. Joe Biden's been there. Of course, Joe Biden, Scranton is where he sort of grew up. So that makes a little more sense.
Old stomping grounds, yeah.
But without the Electoral College is my point that this place would not get any attention from presidential campaigns. And frankly, that is how it should be. This is a backwater, and you look at the map of campaign events. It's like all of California gets 3, all of New York gets 1, all of Texas gets 3 or 4, and out of hundreds. And that's because those votes don't matter. If you vote in Texas, fuck you. Your vote is worthless. But here in Pennsylvania, probably the most important swing state, our votes count 10 times as much as anybody else's. And that's bullshit. It's bullshit not only because it's egregiously unfair. You have the whole election decided in a country of 330 million people by 400,000 people in 5 states.
Right.
But also the fact that all of that 330 million people's worth of political pressure gets dumped on my head and your head.
Sure. And not only that, but the temperature taken of the voters in Pennsylvania dictate the putative campaign promises that translate potentially into the policies of whoever wins, right? So it's like, setting the course for the future based on what the swing voters may or may not think of fracking.
Yeah. No, Harris has gotten in a bit of trouble for previously being against fracking or critical of fracking. And I think she's basically jettisoned that promise, which, I don't love, but I don't blame her either.
Well, here's the thing though, right? Because I don't know, we plan to talk about this, but we saw recent polling on Pennsylvania specifically in like if Harris threw support behind an arms embargo on Israel, which because of the way that the Biden administration, let alone Netanyahu, has totally taken the term ceasefire to not mean ceasefire at all, right? Arms embargo is the new kind of demand from Palestinian rights groups and other groups that want the genocide to end. And the polling in Pennsylvania shows that independent, i.e. swing voters in Pennsylvania, would be some massive percentage. Like I forget if it was broken down by men and women or how it was done, but it was like 30 or 50% more likely to vote for her if she supported that policy. And there was like this 0% less likely to vote for her if she supported that. So it was like no downside risk, all positive. And so one wonders, and this goes back to kind of discussions we've had about popularism. It tends, the people that tend to support that kind of thing seem to be selective usually in the kind of policies they focus on. So we'll see if that kind of swing voter policy actually gets any attention.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when Matt Iglesias, popularist par excellence, said that we should have Matt Damon run for office precisely because he said some years ago that he only recently stopped saying like homophobic slurs. This was the argument for him. And it's just, this is the temptation in punditry to just talk your book is overwhelming. I've probably done it many times. I'm sure I've done it many times. You want to say, oh, it's the most popular thing. But when you can look at polling like that, especially on a critical issue, it's just undeniable. And I do think that there are some initial signs, as we've said, that, Harris is not going to go hardcore Zionist by not picking Shapiro, by picking some advisors. I forget his name, but there's one guy who's prominent in the Clinton and Obama administrations who's notably sympathetic to Palestinians. But relative to the Biden team, at least. That's right. We hear, let's put it this way, as a kind of proxy, she's pissing off the right people. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Jonathan Chait and Matt Iglesias are furious. Yeah. Maybe we can do a couple of brief comments on the rally itself. I watched some highlights. I could not make it in, alas. I was most pissed off because, when I go to Target, there's a level 2 charger there that Target will let you use for free for an hour. So I always go plug in to get, 75 cents worth of free electricity. And for your car, if people don't know, you've got a lovely new electric vehicle. Yeah, exactly. A little Hyundai Kona, not a super fancy Rivian or whatever. But, that's like 30 miles of range. And right now, the only way to charge it at home is with an extension cord strung out the basement window. And so that takes like 80 hours to charge it up all the way. And it does work if you just basically leave it plugged in all the time. But, it's nice to just top off. Anyway, the cops had blocked the back way that I take in there, which is obnoxious. But anyway, so Trump said one thing was that tariffs are, quote, attacks on a foreign country. It doesn't affect our country. And famously, attacks on foreign countries don't affect our country, famously. Yeah. Attacks on goods that they are sending into our country don't affect our country. And this should be, discussed in the context of his proposal, supposedly. I mean, I doubt he would actually be able to do this, but to get rid of the income tax entirely. Zero it out and compensate with a tariff on everything which if you do the math would be a tariff of like 130, 140%, something like that. So you would simultaneously have a massive price increase on basically everything. Almost nothing is produced wholly within the country. There's always like parts that are imported, or it's shipped to Canada or Mexico for like processing or something like that. Very little stuff is produced 100% domestically. And so this would be a hugely inflationary thing to do, and would increase the price of food by a lot. Which is not cheap right now. I'm going to tell you. I was in Greece for over a year, and I came back and had a little sticker shock. Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And at the same time, just a massive transfer of income upward, because who pays most of the income tax? It's rich people, because they make most of the money. And so this would be, basically a transfer of revenue collection from the rich to the middle class and the working class and the poor, the people who buy rather than save. And I think it's fair to say this would be the biggest combination of tax cuts for the rich and tax increases for everyone else in American history by a lot. Yeah. I do think, like, how can people believe this shit? It's like a tariff on, like, you just think, okay, well, here, I bought a Hyundai Kona electric vehicle. It was imported from Korea. So it'd be 140% more expensive if that had been the regime.
But you see, Ryan, to make America great again, we just cut ourselves off from the entire world. And maybe this is a subversive way to take down capitalism and just like not have any integrated supply chains or systems where multinational corporations supply the goods that we consume. We just have to start from scratch in this country and give ourselves everything from our own resources. And it's like, in a kind of way, it's the most kind of ridiculous utopian picture that you could possibly come up with to try to justify that approach, right?
Yeah, and I mean, ironically, the Biden administration is actually attempting to do a lot of something like this, to make a somewhat more autarchical economy where more manufacturing takes place in places like Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. There's a giant artillery factory that was just restarted to make shells for Ukraine in Scranton. There's all these graybeards who have been retired and they're out there, with the hitting things with hammers. But they're trying to do it in a more sensible way where it's not just instantly cut yourself off from everyone. It's like it takes time to
proper industrial policy where you have planning and actually thoughtfulness about what's needed and where the resources need to be and how to fund it and all that. Not just the invisible hand will incentivize through its chaos.
Few other little golden notes. Trump sounded better than he has recently, but he was not on his A game. He was really boring for a lot of it. But at one point,
mad,
right? He said that he talked about Kamala Harris being on the cover of Time magazine, and he said that I'm much better looking than Kamala. And
everything with Trump is like projection. It's so funny.
It's just the level of pettiness. It's like, dude, you are a fat 78-year-old man. Kamala's not a supermodel, but like she's an attractive woman.
And that's why he says it, right? Like every time he says something like that, it is the most patently obvious way to address his own insecurity by pretending he has cosmic power to make it not so through stating otherwise. Like it's just like when he says, "I am the most humble and I am the least racist and least sexist. I have the biggest crowds."
That's right.
She's not the pretty one. I'm the pretty one. That's his approach to like truth. He's going to like look at reality and say, I don't like what I'm seeing. Actually, I'll change it through my words.
Yeah. He said, global warming will, quote, give you slightly more beachfront property if it happens. This is something he said several times. It's one of those things that just like Trump, certain things stick in his head. Like apparently this is where build the wall came from. Like his advisors were trying to get him to focus on immigration policy. And like, here was a slogan that he just sort of latched onto and just said it a billion times. But, it's like, I don't even know how you come up with that. It's like, okay, the sea's going to come up and it's going to flood all the beaches. and then there won't be beaches there anymore. They'll be moved inland, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's sort of like that famous H-Bomber guy clip from Ben Shapiro talking about, oh, well, if the sea levels rise, what do you think? All the people who live in those unlikely areas, where won't they just sell their homes and move?
It's going to be so easy to sell that property. So many people will want to buy it.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of the water levels around the world rise by let's say 5 feet over the next 100 years, say 10 feet by the next 100 years, and it puts all the low-lying areas on the coast underwater, right? Which, let's say all of that happens. You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move?
Just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Anyway, last thing to transfer into a general discussion of the Trump campaign, he forgot he was in Pennsylvania. He said, am I right? North Carolina? Yeah, which I guess he was there a while ago. And, that it's just indicative of his whole declining brain. But yeah, this going into the Trump campaign in general, it just seems like they're totally at a loss of what to do. They got this guy who's 78 years old. His brain is cooked, and, he just can't
stop. Moody.
Yeah.
He's also moody. I feel like he's just so mad that they spent $100 million campaigning against Biden, and he was so confident in going against Biden. And then he had his convention, and then the rug was pulled out from under him because, his convention's over. They spent all this money, and now he has to come up with a new plan to go against a competent opponent. And he's just so mad about it that he's in he's a toddler. So he's in toddler mode where he's just not, he's still throwing a tantrum. He's not moving on to actually do the work he needs to do to try to win, because his emotions rule him,
I wonder if actually, there was some calculation on Biden's part or the people around him to say okay, maybe I need to drop out, but let's not do it until after the Republican convention. And they've made this too old thing the centerpiece of their entire campaign. Because once, not only have they wasted all this money and messaging on Biden, now the script is completely flipped around, because now he's the oldest candidate ever by a huge margin. And he's almost 20 years older than Kamala. And it may, it's telling that the New York Times is not running front page headlines every single day of the week, wondering if Trump is too old to run and if he should drop out. But nevertheless, I think it's now a major theme in the campaign, because he's constantly making these flubs. He had the Twitter Spaces event with Elon Musk where he sounded like Sylvester the cat. And I don't know did you listen to some of that?
No.
He was just lisping his word. He sounded like he was missing his teeth or something like that. Like he'd taken his dentures out.
She looked like the most beautiful actress ever to live. It was a drawing. She looked very much like our great first lady, Melania. Yeah. She didn't look like Camilla, but of course she's a beautiful woman, so we'll leave it at that.
It was
look, most of us have never found him charming. In fact, find him quite gross and idiotic and any number of adjectives. But if you look at the rally or any number of interactions between him and crowds, his own fans don't seem super thrilled by him lately, so he doesn't even, whatever charm he had in a kind of circus ringleader way isn't even really working anymore with the same people.
Yep. Folks around here, I didn't live here in 2020 or 2016, but they said that there's way fewer Trump signs than there were at this point in the campaign. In those years, especially 2016, at 2016 rallies, you go and look at them, Trump's rambling like crazy as usual, but it had a sort of a positive energy to it and a sort of message. We're going to kick out the illegals. Everyone's going to have a good paying manufacturing job. We're going to fix this place up, kick the bums out of Washington. It was, it was a positive, somewhat optimistic.
People were having fun at his rallies, and he was cracking jokes. I think, like any highly insecure person, when he's confident, when he feels like he's going to win, he can be more relaxed, and he is more light and funny and less nasty, actually. I think his nastier moments, I don't think play well, even though we might cynically think that they do. I don't think they do. I think when you talk to the people that enjoy voting for him rather than the hold your nosers who are doing it for their own self-interest or whatever, right? They think he's fun. They want to hang out with him. It's that kind of cliche thing, right? That he knows how to really get the libs, but when he's in his like sour kind of dour mode where he's playing the victim, that's not giving them the affective result they want. You know, they don't get to enjoy that in the same way that they used to enjoy his performances.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you can see that at the rally, because there are just like long stretches where he's just complaining about really obscure stuff and the audience is just dead silent. You know, they just didn't have that same sort of the charismatic connection between the speaker and
that's it.
the audience that you noticed in previous rallies. People were like, you know, just sort of looking around, you know, like, man, this isn't what I was expecting. The other thing about the campaign, you know, you mentioned J.D. Vance, and I think that has really backfired on them terribly. His approval ratings are quite weak. And when you look at, you know, the breakdown, I was just recently looking at some crosstabs. Who knows if they're accurate or not, but he's like underwater on every major demographic group. He's underwater with men. He's underwater with men more than women. 12 points versus 8 points. Not sure what's going on there, but there's just this gold mine of crazy shit that he's said on podcasts over the last like 4 or 5 years.
Did you see that when Trump brought up, or was, I don't know if he brought it up or if it was brought up to him, the accusation that his ticket is weird, he threw Vance under the bus. He's like, no, not me. And they're not talking about me. They're talking about Vance. Right.
The guy that I picked to replace me if I croak. Also, I'm 78 years old and visibly declining. And I think another factor with why the weird thing and why they're so wrong-footed by it is by how much of right-wing discourse happens on Twitter now, which is every day becoming more and more like Gab or Stormfront, you know, just a right-wing, saturated with right-wing voices. But the way that Elon Musk has rejiggered the algorithm and the way that he is ultimately banned left-wing critics of him and changed the moderation so that if you have a post with cisgender in it, it's marked as a slur. Whereas, you know, he's restored all these accounts for Milo Yiannopoulos and Trump. And there was that guy, Dom Luker, right, who posted an image of CSAM, like one of the most notorious pieces of CSAM in history. You know, infamous among people who do like content moderation. And Musk.
And what is that acronym for people that don't know?
Child sexual abuse material. And, you know, Elon personally posted about restoring this guy's account. But so the way that plus the algorithm changes, the incentive it's created is for whenever something happens, all the right wingers scramble to say the most deranged shit you could possibly think of, because that's what gets you attention on Twitter now, Vichy Twitter. And I think that, you know, every time there's just this little boomlet of totally insane stuff. Like when Kamala was ribbing Tim Walz about white people spicy, and, you know, they're just making jokes. I mean, this is classic Minnesota. If you know people from Minnesota, they talk about this kind of shit all the time. It's not even true 99% of the time, but it's just like a funny little thing to joke about. And these people are coming unglued. They were like looking up his old hot dish recipes, which had some like green chilies in it, you know.
And Ben Shapiro basically in a tweet, I saw someone point out that he was so mad by it, he accidentally admitted to settler colonialism, talking about like white people and spices.
Yeah, the Europeans committed, you know, wars and colonialism for 500 years so that they could get control of the spice trade, which is, I mean, that's kind of true. But aside from it being a joke, green chilies are not that spicy. You know, let's be honest. They're like a half a step above a bell pepper, you know. But you know, Tim Walz is doing whiteface. He's throwing white people under the bus. Man, that's fucking weird, dude. That is a weird thing to say.
They're losing their mind. I think it's so important to figure out why they're all losing their minds about the weird thing so much. And part of it, I think, is that there's been such a fraudulent positioning of these fringe extremists as the real America and the silent majority and the people who are actually aggrieved and exploited and are the real essence of America, this, Christian nationalism nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And like the unmasking of that obvious truth and the display of actual normality and the actual type of person that predominates, like the kind of neighborly guy who's a football coach, and like these cliches too, whether like in the vein of Friday Night Lights or whatever, like these kind of cliches that themselves we might think are okay, that's America, whatever. America's diverse and different and whatever. But like even those stereotypes that people used to make fun of as being overly broad and not taking into account diversity, like those were lost for these weirdos claiming that they represent. And so like the reclaiming, and it's also reminding me why it was weird to see conservatives yelling at football players, like the blonde cheerleader stereotype of Taylor Swift cheering on her football player hero. Yeah. Like that is like traditional, like red, white, and blue American Pie stuff. And they were going after it because as part of the same process, I think they are so mad that their weird fringe stuff is being unmasked as obviously perverse and not the real America. Like there is no real America, but it's definitely not that, right?
Yeah. And I think the conversation between Kamala and Tim Walz, it's a sort of vision of America where, different types of Americans have different sort of cultural folkways, and that's fine. There's plenty
pluralism.
Of room for everyone. And, you could enjoy volcanically spicy stuff or not. And that's no big deal. But I think, the Tim Walz pick especially, it just illustrates that that Republicans now are way, way, way out of the mainstream, even among heterosexual, married family football coach white dudes. That their politics is freaky, even for that type of person, that type of American. And they're like, dude, I just want to have a beer and watch the game. What the fuck are you talking about? This Algerian boxer you think is a woman because she punches hard?
Well, and that's the other thing. So, which isn't, because there's plenty of Americans who are like, homophobic, racist. We would be kind of unhappy to hear them voice their opinions at Thanksgiving dinner or something.
Yeah.
But they don't want to center those views at the front of their politics. Like they don't even necessarily want them to be political issues. Like they could maybe care less what happens with gay marriage or like, they mostly want to make sure that their bills are being paid and that whatever, there's like a number of people that happen to have these important views, but that has nothing to do with like making that your political project, right? We've talked about in the past, Obama famously gained voters that then ended up going for Trump, who were always racist, but that just wasn't their top political priority. They were like, I still prefer this Obama guy, And Obama himself was, I think, also the kind of figure that seemed very normal in an American way, even if he was kind of, perceived as a little exotic to some racist people or whatever. But he was like the kind of person they could vote for anyway and be like, hey, I pat myself on the back that it's like I tried spicier food. I voted for Barack Hussein Obama. You know what I mean? And that is such a different kind of racism or ignorance or xenophobia than like the supercharged kind that makes every issue actually about, the super secret conspiracy between Jews bringing brown people over the border to, steal your jobs and rape your women. It's just like so obviously crazy, insane, and nasty that when you take away the clownish kind of entertaining thing that Trump alone can do, and you have this boring white nerd dork, I shouldn't even say nerd, dork like Vance, and he's just like delivering these lines in an unfunny, monotone way without comic timing at all. And all you have are these terrible claims. Suddenly very easy to make that look bad for a whole host of people, right?
Yeah, I think that probably the median like person in this country is, as you say, has pretty retrograde views on certain things. But I think that the key difference for that type of person is they they may have some racist instincts, but they don't want to see themselves as racist, like that, right. Bigoted and so on. Yeah. And to just openly embrace it is a giant, that this is the whole point of dog whistling. It's like you want to give people plausible deniability. I'm not against integrated schools. I'm against forced busing, bullshit rhetoric like that. Maybe to close out the Trump bit, next week he is doing a rally in Howell, Michigan, which is long been headquarters of like the KKK in that state. Decades of history of white supremacist crazies. And lo and behold, like a few weeks ago, there was a march there from some, white supremacists where they were chanting, "We love Hitler, we love Trump." And that's where Trump is going next week. And it's just like embracing the stench to a degree unparalleled in American history. Yeah, you can't predict who's going to win, but it certainly doesn't seem like they have a great plan to do it.
And it certainly helps to have a ticket that, certainly has its problems and had its hiccup with the protesters that, Harris on the second chance spoke to in a different way. And there's work to be done there. And, there's issues with that swing state stuff with immigration where she's doing the kind of thing that I think allows for the MAGA people and the KKK to further grow, which is to say have what some call like quote unquote reasonable racist approaches to things like policing and immigration that end up kind of complementing the more extreme versions that you see in the right-wing parties, right? Mm-hmm. So there's some work to be done there, but at least you have this contrast, basic human decency, and what Waltz is bringing to the table and pointing out all the ways that freedom, justice, neighborliness are the values embodied by not that ticket, but the Democratic ticket, right?
Yeah. So good point to switch to the Harris's sort of impromptu policy rollout that she's been doing over the last week or so. There was this sort of drumbeat of coverage from the New York Times and others, these political reporters who were like, where's Kamala's policies? Where's her policies? We want to talk about her policies. And like, anything about the New York Times, especially its political reporters, they don't give a shit about policies. It was just a thing to attack her for doing. And, whenever there's a sort of reporter scrum where she takes some questions here and there, all the DC politics people, with a couple of exceptions, they're always like, what do you react to Trump's things? What do you say to this? What do you say to that? It's never give me the details of your earned income tax credit. You're going to reform the, bail system for federal prisons. They don't care about that crap. Yeah. It's all horse race.
It is good, though, that she's doing it. Just because,
I agree.
I think the common voter would like to know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no. And the rest of the political media that isn't just horse race clowns like Peter Baker and Maggie Haberman and all those dipshits, Jeremy Peters, I could go on. It is important to know.
We'll do a whole episode on taking down those clowns. But
yeah, God. I think the Times' coverage in this election so far has been worse than in 2016, and that is fucking saying something.
That's hard to do.
Yeah. And the way that they lead the whole journalist, conversation around by the nose, because, Jesus, it's like 7% of all reporters in the country work for the New York Times now. They sort of become a monopoly.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was less than half of that, like 5-6 years ago. But, all the local papers are dying. Even the Washington Post is in trouble. LA Times, is a shell of its former self. And only the New York Times is remaining, thanks to Wordle. And Wirecutter.
Wait, is that really why? Because of Wordle's financial success? Like they're benefiting from that?
Not just Wordle, all their games that they have there, crossword puzzle and stuff. Yes. Apparently that is where they make more than half of their money. And it's a lot of money. They have.
What's great about capitalism is that you have to rely on basic things like the spread of information and the covering of important political events on the profit motive and how that functions. That is probably the best way to set up society.
Yeah. Well, it was bad when it was advertising that paid for all this shit, but I think it's worse now. We got to do something about Facebook and Google for sure. But at any rate, yeah. So policies, we've got a few of them. First ones that I saw were a bunch of home buyer policies. Basically, she proposes a $25,000 payment tax credit, something, but subsidy for first-time home buyers, and also a tax credit for people who build homes for first-time buyers. And both of those, I think, are pretty stupid.
And the devil's also in the details as well, right? Apparently, the $25,000 doesn't apply to every first-time home buyer. Only those that are "quote-unquote" first generation, which means that the parents of whomever's buying the home also, I don't know if it's they've never owned a home or they currently do not own a home. Also unclear, as Matt Brunig pointed out, who counts as a parent. Step-parents, godparents, grandparents who raised the person. What if the parents themselves didn't buy it, but their LLC did? Anyway, administrative nightmare. And other than that, it would just be a $10,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers if you're not "quote-unquote" first generation. This is classic neoliberal Kamala coming back, like coming up with unnecessarily complicated shit that doesn't apply to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I guess there's no reason to subsidize first-time home buyers in particular. Like a lot of those people will just be wealthy, even if their parents were not. And there's also, every chance there's a whole bunch of other subsidies for home buying already. And one of the effects is that it makes the prices of homes more expensive, Sure. So the whole subsidy could just be eaten up by increased prices if you don't do other things to increase the supply. And the tax credit for builders who sell to first-time buyers, that's not something you would ever think about normally. You just build a house and sell it to whoever. Like now you have a whole new layer of bureaucracy, or you got to set up, so that you're going to how are you going to even
do that? Secure the buyer before you build the place? Like that's quite a process.
Yeah. Or, you just hope that you draw someone, I guess, if you don't have that capacity. That's, I don't know. It's just kind of foolish in general. However, she's also spoken about, not in specifics, but she's said that, we need to expand the supply of homes. And I think that would be a much more effective way to make it more affordable for first-time home buyers and
absolutely. But by the millions, I think there was something in there like 6 million new homes to be built, something like that. As long as it's actually just like, this is a project that is facilitated by the government, not like we estimate that if we provide the right incentives, the private market will supply these many homes in the right way. It's always devil in the detail kind of thing, right?
Yeah. There's basically, you could go about it a couple of ways. You could do basically the YIMBY sort of policy, because I'm basically convinced by the argument that it is way too difficult to build in certain cities, particularly like New York and California. You look like the government of Texas, of all places, has really taken a lot of steps to radically expand supply of homes in high demand cities like Austin and Houston. It's actually had a pronounced negative effect on rents and home prices. This is basic supply and demand shit. It does work if you can get it done at scale. And you just walk around like San Jose, where you find these like shitty fucking 1960s tumble down ranch houses that cost like $2.5 million. That is ridiculous. And the only reason it's like that is because it's almost impossible to build anything there. And, so that's something you could do. Basically you have to work with states and local governments to sort of streamline the process and allow for upzoning and all that type of thing. The other thing you could do is social housing. And she made some suggestive comments about using like government financing to just do it directly, basically where you could partner again with states or local governments. This is basically our idea with the social housing paper I wrote with Saoirse Gowan, where the federal government gives grants to municipalities and so on, so that they can just directly build and own their own projects, that then you could sort of, take the delta of whatever profit that you're making off of a segment of market rents and use that to subsidize affordable units. And how much you could do that depends on the prevailing rents and so on. But if you're in a place like San Jose and you can build in a timely fashion, you could have straight up free rents for some, if a house is worth $2 million, that's 2 bedrooms or whatever, that is 80 years old or something. There's a ton of potential. Basically, you're socializing the landlord profit there for the government, for the people. There's tons of focus on the sort of left about, well, it needs to be affordable. We need more affordable housing. But I think, the truth is that, like, outside of the very tippy top of the market, where people are, more or less buying for investment purposes for the most part, everywhere is way too expensive. The rents in Manhattan and Brooklyn are preposterous. It's like you need prices to come down across the entire market.
That's true.
And, just less money going into the pockets of landlords who don't do anything like Donald Trump used to do.
Well, and this, I think a point you've made before as well, which is the social housing and the just general building of having more supply of homes will reduce the number of investment properties. But there's a lot of people that are just buying up homes, but in part that's because, maybe you could explain it. Like, why would that relationship shift, and why wouldn't there be so many homes that are just used for as investment properties?
Well, so for an individual, if you're buying a home for an investment, that's crazy. A home, economically speaking, a home. I'm a homeowner. They don't get better over time. They fall apart. They need lots of expensive repairs. We've been doing that. And so the only reason the price goes up is because A, all the subsidies on the one side, and B, all of the supply restrictions on the other. It's basically sort of Ponzi scheme, layout. And, I don't think it's not a terrible idea in my view, to say like we should target a sort of like stable home price. We don't need to go for Japan, where like the housing is a consumption good in Japan. You buy a house, it's like a car. It immediately starts depreciating in value. Sure. After 30 years, you tear it down, you build a new house. Yeah. That's the way they do it. And that's the way you could do it. But as a sort of like savings vehicle where you could sell it at the end of 20 years or something and get back more or less what you paid for it plus inflation, that seems fair to me. But the main reason people like having a home, I would say, though, besides because the part of the problem with, you can get really lucky or you could get unlucky in terms of how much it grows in value. But, if you are excited about how much you made and you sell it, well, then you have to live somewhere else that has probably gone up in price a tremendous amount since you last bought a home. And so that those, savings are going to be captured by your next purchase. But the time you were living in the home, it was basically a form of rent control, right? You lock in a rate that, unlike when you actually rent a place or rent an apartment or whatever, the rent just gets too damn high because it keeps going up and up over 20 years. And then, it's remarkable how much money you've spent, renting over that time compared to somebody who had locked in a certain rate, right? Yeah. I think, maybe Marshall Steinbaum said this earlier on the podcast, but the 30-year mortgage is rent control for the middle class. And that is, financially, that is an insane idea. And it would not exist without all the government subsidies and structures that make that market happen. It did not exist before the New Deal. You're talking about people making hugely leveraged investments. Sometimes with the federally subsidized mortgages, you're only putting like 3% down. That's what I put down when I bought that house in Philly, 2019. So huge leverage on a highly illiquid asset that is very difficult to sell. And with the mortgage, you can prepay whenever you want. So for the bank, that sucks because, they're banking on all this, you paying all this interest. Whereas if you get a windfall, you get an inheritance or something, you could just pay down $100,000 on the house and just take away all of that interest payment they were expecting. Right. That they would never lend that out. The only reason they do it, which is the way that most mortgages happen now, that they issue the mortgage and then they turn around and they sell it to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, the government sponsored entities that hold all these mortgage-backed securities. And it's a functional, a system for the most part, unless it goes completely haywire and blows the economy up. But, I think that, that there's every reason to, on the one hand, control the growth in the price of homes. And on the one hand, cut the renters in on some of these subsidies, while you're making homes cheaper. It's like, why do first time home buyers get $25,000, but renters don't get anything? Aside from Section 8, which is this fucking microscopic program for the very, very poor. And, your average Joe who's just like middle class, like construction worker in, the Bronx or something, they don't get anything. That's kind of bullshit. It ought to be a much more level sort of playing field between people who would prefer to rent versus own.
Exactly.
But we'll have to see, if she has like a more thought out plan.
But this is the start, though. She's going to get and her team is going to get blowback and criticisms, and we'll see what they take in and how that shapes what. But it's a good start to at least point out places of concern that policy needs to address and have some kind of offering to start with. And I think maybe you're going to mention groceries and the cost of food next. That's one other piece I saw, right?
Yeah, the price gouging proposal, which was very vague at first, and it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But they actually released some language, and my boss David Dane was taking a look at it. It's much more defensible than you would think, because at first it seemed like, okay, we're just going to do price controls for groceries and not sort of lay out any sort of mechanism there. But it's actually more just like a sort of emergency button that you could press for any sorts of prices in particular. It's not just for groceries necessarily. And, I think that, you look at like the history of World War II with the Office of Price Administration, an emergency situation where there was like red hot demand in the economy. And, that could have shown up in just massive inflation, but it wasn't. It instead was happened with rationing and so on. And, you think, okay, emergency situations, I am convinced by the, studies I've read and so on, that a whole lot of the inflation that happened in, from 2021 through 2023 was basically opportunistic price gouging. You look at like the price of container shipping, and that just went through the roof, and then came right back down again, and that was basically a one-off emergency situation where there was way more demand for container ships than could possibly be met. And so it expressed itself in this massive increase in price. And I think that is the type of situation where the government could come in and say like, no, we're going to do some rationing here. We're going to put a cap on this. And, we'll just do maybe first come, first serve, or we'll do a lottery or something like that, rather than whoever has the most money gets the slot on the ship and fuck you otherwise.
This reminds me of the kind of point by Karl Polanyi that I think we both like a lot, which is that the key is to make sure that the demos or the people aren't subservient to markets, but that markets are subservient to the common good and to the people and used to serve the people. And so when they are obviously not serving the people, but are harming the people, that's when the government and these are cases where it's like an obvious, like, okay, duh. Well, here's something that like, if we correct this problem in the market, that will help a lot of people and stop a lot of harm.
Yeah, and I'm sure it wouldn't be like efficient, quote unquote, as according to the definition of like neoliberal economists. But, you're talking about a situation again with the container ships where it's like, okay, everyone in the world is paying, a 10 to 20% premium or something for all of their goods that are being shipped, and hundreds of millions of dollars of profits are going into the pockets of the shipping companies in return for them doing not doing anything other than operating their business as normally. Like, that is highly objectionable. And that's a situation where the government could be like, no, listen, you're going to get some profits here, but they're not going to just be this completely unjustified mega profits because you happen to be.
It's bad enough, Ryan. It's bad enough that the owners of capital profit from the collective enterprise that is the economy, as you write about really well in your book, right? This is something that involves, millions and millions of people and is this integrated system that the few who happen to have, they're part of the ownership class benefit from privately, rather than the democratization and the profits redounding to the people and going back. But that actually leads to Matt Brunig's response to the grocery policy, which is to say that he would rather the government just spend $45 billion to buy Kroger and nationalize it so that there's a government mega grocery store where they could just set the prices for all the goods there.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's
like a public option, right?
Yeah, you could provide some competition in the market and saying like, we're going to forego as our public owner the massive profits we could have. And in the same way, through competition, we're going to cut down on profits of the other grocery companies because they're going to have to match ours.
Wouldn't the Ben Shapiros and the libertarians love competition? Wouldn't they love to show how they could just wipe the floor with these government run operations and show how much better their products and services are?
Yeah. And I like the Nordic countries, a lot of them, they'll have a few state owned, Norway, they have like the biggest telecom company and the biggest bank. And it's all partly or majority controlled by the government. And it gives you a toehold into the functioning of the markets. You could say like, all right, we don't want this to be controlled by a sort of tacit oligopoly of people who are just looking down the barrel of, well, if we just sort of do what's normal, we're all going to become rich beyond the dreams of avarice. You can make more planned decisions on behalf of the entire population. And it's great. Let's see, a couple of other things. We got a out-of-pocket max on prescription drugs. That's fine. That's good. As long as you implement it correctly. You don't want them to sort of compensate by jacking the price up on everything else in the whole pharmaceutical industry. Then I think that there's the core of what I think Harris's agenda is going to be. It's going to be like a build out of the family welfare state. So we got a $6,000 tax credit for people who have a kid. And, basically a maternity grant, you would call it in other countries. And then we got a restoration of the Biden child tax credit that was in the American Rescue Plan and did not pass because Joe Manchin thought that the money would be spent on drugs. But, and
this was the policy that reduced child poverty like tremendously, right? Is that the one? And
that's the one.
Reversed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's ongoing dispute about how much it reduced child poverty because you can't just assume that all the poor people are getting the money because they have to file their taxes to get it. However, it undoubtedly cut child poverty by a lot. And insofar as poor people managed to figure out the bureaucracy, which is not that difficult to do if the reason a lot of poor people don't file is because it doesn't matter for them. But if you see there's a big old bunch of money for you, you can figure it out. It definitely did cut child poverty by a lot. As Brunig says, as has been saying, the way to do this is to do it as social democratic benefit, run it through the Social Security Administration, have the checks sent out automatically rather than, through tax time. And, that has the benefit in addition to bureaucracy is that you're accurately, you're sending people the money right when they're making it versus
having to wait.
Yeah. Or doing it. I mean, the Biden child tax credit was going out every month, but it was based on the tax calculations from last year. So there could be people who were not, they had been making too much money to qualify. Now they weren't. And so they're being improperly cut out of the system.
Plus, it has the sending checks or depositing money in an account has the benefit of people understanding what the government is doing for them so that they could then support more such social democratic policies, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just classic sort of good government stuff. Legible, coherent, obvious to the beneficiary. You have your kid, money comes, simple as that. Don't have to do anything other than, get the Social Security card at the hospital. And the other thing about the $6,000 tax credit is that, depending on when the baby's born, you could be like more than a year later that you would actually get the money versus if you're doing a maternity grant properly, it would actually come before the baby's born. Because when I could tell you recently had a kid, when you first come home, there's immediately before and right when you come home, you're just spending a shitload of money on stuff. Bassinet and diapers and, child proofing your house and all that type of crap.
I hear that babies can barely do anything on their own. They need you to do everything for them. So it's very onerous. Is this true?
They are relatively helpless. You can't, they can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It's remarkable.
That's it. See, that comes later. Yeah, that's like, toddler age.
But yeah, so I mean, that said, better $6,000 tax credit than nothing, which is what we currently have, and I would also probably put a pretty sizable dent in child poverty. That's a pretty big grant, by the way. I think that's about twice the size of the maternity grant in Finland, or maybe even more than that. Prices are higher here, but still, it's a nice fat policy. And, you press on the administrative thing because it's like right here. I mean, I think this is partially why it's so important to talk about policy right now, because everything's kind of up in the air. We aren't like writing anything down in laws That's yet. Right. And so I really think it's important to push on this implementation stuff now to try to get it figured out and ironed out in a really solid way so that you're not just sort of hurriedly slapping things together after she wins the election, if she does.
What we don't need is a bunch of liberals to say, Wyatt, don't critique anything. She's not Trump. That's all that matters. No. We really, really, really need her to lead with the strongest policies that will help people. That will also make her more popular, and the ticket will do better if she's actually doing the right thing as well. But we can do multiple things at once, try to defeat Trump and shape, hopefully, the next administration to serve people's lives instead of, blowing the chance.
You want to be, the second coming of Lyndon Johnson and do the, take the biggest bite out of poverty since the 60s. Like, do it right. Do it right, and people will remember you for it. You'll go down in the history books as the president who really got rid of the worst child poverty. Cut it by, if probably cut it by about half, maybe more than that if you implemented it right. And even then, important to emphasize that even if you're making no money at all, and you get this child benefit and you're still in poverty, but you're not at the very bottom in the deepest poverty, that's still huge. That's even more important than getting you over the line, going from $1 underneath the poverty line to $1 above it. Oh, exactly. Now we're not even poverty. It's like, this is a spectrum. And the people at the very bottom, the people who need the help the most, they're still helped even if, the headline figure is only 50% cut. We could maybe do some like integrals or something and figure out the net quantity of missing income there. But, that is a great benefit of the Biden child benefit that wasn't captured by, we cut child poverty by 40%. It's actually quite a bit more effective than that.
And look, maybe one last point about what's possible. If Harris and Walz really trounce Trump and Vance, which I think they could, all of a sudden there's polling that shows Georgia's in play, Nevada, Arizona, even North Carolina's in play. Like, it is not out of the realm of possibility that there could be filibuster. Well, I don't know. We have to run the numbers, but like
not a filibuster-proof majority.
That's probably unlikely. But at least the House is regained. And
they could have 53 seats. I think that would be absolute best case.
That's the max. Yeah. So the majority in both houses, you still have the stupid filibuster to deal with. But that, as we know, can be broken once or twice. Reconciliation and so forth.
Yeah, and the more if you had 53, I think that solid chance you could get rid of it for most normal legislation. Because we've punched more and more holes in it over the years. We got our reconciliation, we got our judicial confirmations and so on. And just all you need is 50 plus the Vice President Walz to ratify that change. Just change your rules, stupid fucking rules of the Senate.
Yeah. And you'll have 53 without having to deal with either Sinema or Manchin.
Yep, they're both out.
So that's a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, in our last few minutes here, should we talk about the UK?
Yeah, it's a shame we don't have more time, but in brief, I think it's worth mentioning. And it relates a little bit to what we talked about at the outset about, the KKK location and the kind of fomenting of xenophobic, racist, Nazi shit in a way that is fostered in part by the kind of liberal carceral immigration state, right? And so there's this piece that we read that talks about how And I think it makes an important point that there's been like 100+ riots in recent, I don't know, weeks, like going back to sometime in
July 31st, and then in the following like week and a half. From what I've read, that was the worst of it. But there's still some sort of brush fire stuff happening, possibly.
Yeah. So these almost race riots, like the kind of backlash against a false rumor that a Muslim immigrant murdered. I mean, there was a murder of 3 school children, right? Mm-hmm. But there was a kind of slanderous lie that pins that on an immigrant, and that was kind of the match that lit all of these. Again, this is also coming in the wake of the Tories losing after 14 years of rule, right? So there's like a lot of context here, but yeah, just a lot of like kind of Charlottesville type stuff going on all over the country. Mm-hmm. And then counter riots and some kind of like how Antifa would respond, going on as well. So in large numbers. So real, some people say unprecedented, like at 55 years, this is the most kind of numerous and dangerous outpouring of violent racist hatred seen in the UK, right?
Yeah.
But the article makes a good point that this has been fomented by the kind of policies and rhetoric of politicians, never mind the media. Even Theresa May, I didn't know this, even Theresa May apparently sent vans into like diverse neighborhoods with billboards that said "Go home," Jesus. Which is just disgusting, right? And so there's a lot of examples about the kind of quote unquote acceptable status quo racism that came in terms of policy against migrants and immigration, as well as just flat out racist rhetoric that politically and culturally has supported what has now kind of erupted. And, of course, with Brexit, we saw a long history, and in France too, there's been a lot of this stuff percolating for a while. But there's some great counter lines about how, the danger to you and your job and your life doesn't come in a dinghy, right, in the sea. It comes in a private jet.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously neither of us are experts on Britain, but I think there's a couple of points to make in that. Number one, as you said, there's a false pinning the blame for this horrible crime on a Muslim person, but then more importantly, I think you had immediate responsibility of collective guilt for the crime on the entire alleged population of immigrants and Muslims. And that is just
because they're all the same, didn't you know?
Yeah. That's just a staple of far right rhetoric in the US, in the UK. Like Breitbart had for a while, like a vertical called Black Crime, where I mean, basically you're just trying to whip up a racist hysteria by focusing on, often enough true stories of immigrants committing crimes against people, because like there are millions of them. Some of them are criminals, but like you could do the same thing with white people. You could have a white crime, and just every time a white person commits a crime, it's like every 30 seconds in this country, there's some horrible crime, and be like,
and that's the difference and that's why I would even say to use the word someone is a criminal is part of that system that tries to make synonymous criminality with a certain race with mm-hmm. people that you would call the other race, non-white races, right? And it functions differently in different places, but like the whole racist tie to the carceral and immigration systems is to kind of make the police state and their job the enforcement of protecting the whites, the innocent non-criminals against the dark people who are the threat, the danger, and like they're the criminals, whether or not they've done anything yet, whether or not we've caught them, they're all criminals. And conversely, the vigilantes who commit violence, they are not criminals because they're the white people who you can associate with the police as the protectors of the white race and of our nation and all these things, right? So like who does the violence is coded very differently, whether or not laws are actually broken or not, right?
The other thing I'd say is, in addition to, as you said, how the government basically has whipped up this type of anti-immigrant xenophobia over the years as basically a camouflage for fucking everything up under the Tories. And then on the other hand, the labor triangulation basically feeding into that to some extent, though they have reversed a lot of the policies under the previous administration. Like, the Tories had this plan that they're going to deport everyone to Rwanda for some reason. And Starmer, to his credit, got rid of that fucking ridiculous plan.
Well, yeah, I mean, doesn't that remind you of, who is it? Who's the asshole, Abbott in Texas? Greg Abbott, who keeps like trying to send migrants to like Rhode Island or what are these supposed liberal bastions.
Exactly. Yeah, same type of thing. In addition to that, you have, the right-wing media. If you're at all familiar with the British tabloids, they're just the most disgusting abortions of journalism in the English-speaking world. I think the worst newspapers in the English-speaking world that, aside from like, straight up neo-Nazi zines or whatever, just horrible, blood-curdling, murderous xenophobia, racism, and abject stupidity.
How much of that's owned by Murdoch? Rupert Murdoch, the same guy who owns Fox News.
Most of it, I think that. Well, I don't want to speak, but I'm pretty sure he owns the Daily Mail, the Sun. But the rest of them, they all act in exactly the same way. It's just the same type of Fox News brainworms, except worse. And then the other thing is the role of social media influencers, particularly Twitter. Again, as I was speaking before about how a whole lot of these far right psychopaths have been unbanned by Elon Musk. I'm not sure if Tommy Robinson has been unbanned. I believe he has, but he was one of the guys. A whole bunch of these British guys that, just far right psychos have been using Twitter to spread, their message where, previously, like, even if for folks who weren't banned under the previous regime at Twitter, like people kept a lid on it because if you went too far, you'd lose your account. And now you don't. And in fact, Elon Musk himself participated in that. He said that Britain was going to see a civil war because of all this. He's basically on the side of the rioters. And the final thing I'd say is that I think this is leading to some much needed sort of course corrections among this sort of British society in general. What Elon Musk did pissed British people off a lot. And I'm over on Blue Sky for the most part. And apparently the UK has been, over the last couple of weeks, the biggest source by far of new signups, because people are like, fuck this Twitter noise. I don't want to be part of it. I want to, take my posting elsewhere. And the government also, there's all sorts of laws in Britain. They don't have free speech rights like in the United States. There's all sorts of lawsuits that have been, proposed for people, spreading like basically incitement to riot, that sort of stuff. And, last thing, the government has been moving with remarkable dexterity on prosecuting a lot of these cases. So far, it's been about 2 weeks, something like that. And I just read a BBC article that at least 395 people have already been charged for participating in the riot, for assaulting police, for starting fires and stuff like that. And it just makes for astounding contrast with the Department of Justice in January 6th. They let people leave. First of all, there are no arrests at the scene almost. And then it took them months and months and months. Some of those cases are still being processed. I don't think they've gotten even 395 to this day. It's just, it seems like they're reacting appropriately. They're like, holy shit, this is really bad.
Proper alacrity, move with alacrity.
Yeah, it's like we need to get all of our ducks in a row on this, and we need to move quick. We need to set an example that this is not okay. And
all we want, right, is a responsive, functional government that you can pressure, cajole, debate, and push into doing the right thing. That'll sometimes do it without you needing to do that, and sometimes it'll require mass politics to do what is right, instead of the mass politics being on the side of the fascists and state oppression. And that's quite a different universe. And it's nice to see the vision of possibility that in the UK and France, in the States and around the world, maybe there's a little opening for reversal of the trend. And there's a place where politics can actually shape things to a more hopeful, more just world.
Yeah. And again, it's like these guys didn't sack Parliament, they didn't try to interfere with the transition of power. In terms of like the functioning of the state and the preservation of Britain as like a sort of going concern, this was far less serious than the January 6th assault, though, it was way more people were injured and so on. because the riots were all over the place. But you know, the fact that our government controlled by the supposedly forces of democracy has just been fucking twiddling its thumbs for months against, you know, above all, the perpetrator of it all, Donald Trump, that he is out. I mean, this is a thought I had also with the Wilkes-Barre rally. It's like, it is just disgusting to me that this motherfucker is out here holding rallies to run for president again after what he did. You know, it's like, do we have no dignity as a country?
Not just a convicted felon, you know, but also an obviously like treasonous, you know, self-aggrandizing thug who just wants to like defraud everyone, defraud the public. And apparently part of the campaigning, we didn't even talk about this, part of the campaigning problems, I don't know if you know much about this. He's, you know, using the money from the campaign to pay bills or take care of his personal issues. And he can't actually hold rallies in a bunch of indoor places around the country because he owes them money.
Yeah. He's stiffed of venues, stiffed his private security. It's just very Trump. Yeah. But that guy's, he's 1,000 times worse than Tommy Robinson. And yet for some reason, we just can't get this motherfucker. But
well, it just takes more light showing the people what public servants are actually attempting in some basic way to serve the common good. You know, Tim Walz apparently doesn't own any stock and he doesn't even own a home anymore. He sold it when he became governor for like $300,000. And like the contrast of this guy who's like, okay, well, he's not, getting rich off politics and I don't even know how he could be leveraged given his situation. But like the obvious distinction that Plato made, right, between good and bad regimes, whether it's ruled by the few, the single person or the many, are they oriented to serving the common good or are they using the position of power to serve themselves? That's the most fundamental distinction. And like so many people in our country and around the world can't see the most obvious examples where the public servants are actually there for themselves. And all we want is where it's a little bit less obvious and a little bit more possible that we could push for people to actually serve the common good. Is that too much to ask for?
I mean, Tim Walz, last thing I'll say, I was shocked to learn that he didn't even write Bernie Sanders has written a couple of books. And of course, because he's super famous, they sold like millions of copies and he made like millions of dollars. There's that famous, James Adomian sketch where Bernie's doing his taxes and he's like, I made too much money.
$1 million? How? I'm rich. I'm ruined. Get out of my life! Shut up. We sold too many of these goddamn books, that's why I'm rich. Call the ghostwriter and give him $1 million bonus. I don't need the money. It's not that good a book anyway.
And, you know, I don't blame him for doing that necessarily, but
sure.
You get to be that level of politics and to not even have accidentally cashed in by doing the absolutely most basic type of stuff.
And this is the guy that got the kids, right? Their food, that, you know, pre-K meals for, if you're in public school, you're not going to ever be too poor to eat. You're going to have lunch. You're going to have food. And he's the guy that like has acted on this idea with the legislature and of course, but like that, like, and he even said, you're not empowered to build political capital, but to burn it, right? And this is a guy who not only is not profiting from his position, but he's burning his political capital to help people.
Yeah, universal school lunch. And he said in that, you know, I would hope I could send that clip to the Harris campaign or their policy people, because he said basically that, you know, we don't want to fuss around with the bureaucracy. We don't want
testing.
We don't want poor people to not eat because their parents were too busy to fill out some form. Just give it to everyone. Yeah. You know,
we don't want classes, you know, divided over school lunches. We don't want like the rich kids who don't get the thing that the other kids are getting, and then you like suddenly it's becoming like obvious that the kids are different at school, right?
Exactly. And you look at how much, you know, Bruning has a great post on this, that you look at how much school costs, public school in this country, it's like $800 billion. And so we give $800 billion of free at the point of service schooling, you know, to everyone. And yet
we don't means test that.
Yeah, exactly. The $5 billion that would cost to have every student have free lunch, for every day. for some reason, now we have to put a little extra bureaucracy in there and start collecting credit card numbers and stuff. Fuck that. Just
what the next thing is? We need Tim Walz, after he gets done toasting JD Vance and the right for being weird. We need him to show how neoliberals are weird.
Yeah, it's just normal. I mean, this is just straight up like business logic. Like, we don't need a separate payments bureaucracy for this tiny fraction of the school budget. That's stupid. That's inefficient. Oh, and one last comment. I would say the political capital analogy always kind of bothers me because, like, what do you do with capital? You invest it so it grows. And I think that the appropriate thing and what I would hope would happen if you did something like universal school lunch for the entire country, or a great big new family welfare state for every family, that it would actually pay off. That you wouldn't burn it, you wouldn't lose the next election, you would win it because people saw the benefit, they liked it, and they wanted to keep you in power. So, we're not doing political income, we're doing political investment. We're doing
yeah, baby. That's right.
But yeah, we've probably gone on long enough. But anyway, yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back at some point, and we'll see you in the next episode.